This is the Ugly Duck. I'm not saying that, Suzuki named it themselves. This weird-looking motorcycle might seem like a distant prototype, one that would never reach the public eye.
And yet, this off-roader was months away from entering production. This was not just a shell made for looks. The technologies it hid underneath could have changed the way dirt bikes look in modern days.
In 1991, at the Tokyo Motor Show, Suzuki unveiled the Ugly Duck together with two of its brothers, the XF4 and XF5. This is the story of a time when the Japanese saw the future closing in and tried to capitalize on it. The wild styling was far from the Ugly Duck's most controversial aspect. In fact, this prototype was meant to serve a leisure audience, non-motorcyclists. Families that would want to explore the local woods on weekends. It was a bike built for outdoor enthusiasts, not off-road riders. For people who wanted to cruise through their local mud pits or take a stroll down the beach, the Ugly Duck was going to be their closest friend. Because underneath that body, Suzuki developed an absolute weapon. The wide tires were meant to be run at low PSI, thus increasing their contact patch and crawling grip. Its seat stood low, approachable, and the bike replaced conventional foot pegs with scooter-style sideboards. The fork was out of the ordinary too, borrowing an old design from the Germans at BMW.
Despite its buffy looks, this unit managed to only weigh 116 kilograms. Now, okay, I might have hyped this up a little too much. In reality, the Ugly Duck had a different purpose. It was supposed to be a showstopper, a reference model, one that could hold people in their tracks.
Only to discover the real innovation lying underneath. Its design was taken a little too far to realistically reach production status, but its purpose was to get people interested in Suzuki's new XF platform. And more specifically, to one engineering marvel.
You see, the Ugly Duck had a unique two-wheel drive system lying underneath. In 1991, dirt bikes featuring all-wheel drive systems were basically unheard of. Honda and Suzuki had shown interest in the technology, and Yamaha was allegedly already working on something similar, but Suzuki was the first to actually show production-ready models.
The point of the Ugly Duck was to compete with bikes like the Rock-On in the leisure segment. And Suzuki had a point. Having two motorized wheels would increase rideability for non-dirt bikers. It would make off-road riding more approachable. What wasn't approachable was the complexity of the system. In order to power its permanent two-wheel drive platform, the Ugly Duck made use of a system of chains and drive shafts connected to the engine gearbox. The right-hand side of the power unit had a regular sprocket with a chain driving the rear wheel, but the left-hand side of that power plant mirrored that first sprocket. A system of chains would then take the second output all the way to the front hub, powering the wheel through a drive shaft.
At this point, you might have the same question I had. What was the point? Was there ever a market for such thing?
Nowadays, a bike like the Ugly Duck might not make sense. But back in the early 90s, it had one obvious purpose. And it all goes back to the story of freewheelers. Few decades before it, Honda needed a vehicle that its dealers could sell both in the winter and summertime. A true all-terrain platform, and that's how those old ATC freewheelers came to life.
Honda invented three-wheelers so families could have more fun together, in the wintertime or any time of year.
They were meant to serve as farm vehicles, possibly even dabbing into the light leisure market. And they worked, with the Japanese selling a boatload of them. The thing is, those freewheelers had a problem. You might see where this is going.
And it's going straight into a shameless ad for our Patreon page. If you want to support us directly and even get the occasional future channel update, that's the place to be. Link is down in the description. Cheers, back to our freewheelers.
In order to properly corner them, a rider had to throw all of its weight in a turn in order to counterbalance the machine. For that to be possible, Honda made these little trikes very small and compact. The side effect was, this made them popular with children. Parents would buy freewheelers for their offsprings and let them roam around the yards. The thing is, these freewheelers were exceptionally unstable and dangerous. Yet many parents perceived them as kids' toys. This led to some heartbreaking statistics. According to the New York Times, within a short 5-year span, 300,000 injuries were associated with these monster machines. Even worse, 1,000 of those ended up with loss of life.
And that was just in the USA alone. Those numbers were truly daunting.
This was not a toy, it was a death trap. And kids were just let to roam around on them. By 1988, the US government had to put an end to this, effectively banning the sale of such vehicles for one full decade. The Japanese manufacturers had to come up with an alternative.
You see, that was the point of the Ugly Duck. That's why it made so much sense. Because it was meant to replace the infamous freewheelers. Realistically speaking, the Ugly Duck had very low chances of ever seeing an assembly line. But the XF4, a motorcycle built on top of the Ugly Duck platform, that was very close to coming out.
It had a similar purpose, to serve as a mobility tool for the outdoor-loving Japanese market. A way to explore the wild, go deep inside the forest. That's why Suzuki added 2 carbon tubes at the rear. They served as a rack for fixing fishing rods. The paint job itself depicted a fish flying through a river. This was pure utility, Suzuki even adding a rear trailer hitch to this contraption. Behind the glitzy features, the XF4 featured the same two-wheel drive system as the Ugly Duck. Same big and wide wheels, but built with a purpose.
You see, in order to prevent mud getting stuck, the Japanese made these wheels disc-shaped. Powering this beast was an air-cooled 2-stroke single-cylinder, mated to an automatic transmission.
Ease of use was the main design philosophy, and everything was built to support it. In fact, Suzuki had concrete plans to release this motorcycle by July of 1992.
And with it, the Japanese had another ace up their sleeve. The real innovator of the bunch, the XF5.
If the other two vehicles oriented towards a leisure crowd, this was going to be the opposite. Suzuki threw all of their engineering knowledge at it in a quest to build the best performance dirt bike. And this, as well, was inspired by the Ugly Duck. From a looks perspective, this was the most conventional. It featured a conventional telescopic fork.
Well, actually, the closer you look, the sooner you realize that fork was far from normal. The right fork leg acted as regular telescopic suspension.
But the left-hand side hosted a telescopic drive shaft, aimed to transmit power towards the hub of the wheel, thus running the two-wheel drive system. This platform was way more clever than its brothers. While the XF4 and Ugly Duck had permanent drive systems, the XF5 didn't. It featured a technology called Torque Reaction for Detection Cam. In layman terms, a one-way clutch-like system could detect a slide of the front wheel and it would cut power going to it. The drive was also favoring the rear with an uneven bias. You might think this entire concept was heavy.
And it was, coming in at about 7.8 kilograms. But Suzuki didn't just embrace that and went on to develop a full aluminium chassis. Remember, this was the early 90s. Honda only released their version a year after this.
What this meant was that Suzuki managed to bring the XF5 at a total weight of 129 kilograms. No ballerina for sure, but also not terrible. The engine was a high-performance 200cc 2-stroke and they mated it to a 6-speed transmission.
Surprising, given that even today's DRs only get 5. For some reason, Japanese engineers chose an 18-inch wheel setup, both front and rear.
I can only speculate here. Maybe because of their hub drive, the 18-inch front would have put less stress on the system? But anyway, in 1991, this motorcycle looked like out of a science fiction book. Yet Suzuki were serious about it. They had thousands of test miles put on this prototype, and in fact, the one at the Tokyo Salon was a fully functioning unit.
This was by far the closest this platform got to seeing the world. In fact, the Japanese had not only tested the XF5 on their home soil, but even sent it over to the USA for a final judgment.
Now, what that final judgment was, we'll never know. What's certain is, none of these three innovators came to market.
They were months away, but Suzuki ultimately decided to axe the project. Why? It's a good question. One theory I had was cost. Look, all of this fancy engineering was amazing, but it all came at a price. And would the market be able to support that? I would dare to say no.
But there was another thing. Because the Ugly Duck and its siblings didn't only compete in the motorcycle market. Remember what I said at the beginning? Suzuki wanted to find a replacement for freewheelers. And they came up with this fascinating science project. But the times had flown by quickly. And freewheelers were replaced already by quads. That's the thing, this new platform would compete with both two-wheeled and four-wheeled vehicles. And realistically, I don't think the market was big enough. Technically, by 1998, manufacturers were free to sell three-wheelers again, but nobody really did. By then, quads had taken over. The Suzuki Ugly Duck was a statement made by the Japanese company. Its wild engineering still has traces up to this day, with companies like Christini using a system that bears some sort of resemblance to the XF series.
But you know what's bittersweet? This was a time when Suzuki was not afraid to innovate, to push the boundaries. It was a daring Japanese company, striving to be the best.
Nowadays, they only give us bold new graphics and minimum updates to their models. It looks like a different company, for better or for worse.
And the Ugly Duck shows that this didn't have to be the case. Thanks for watching.